On the fourth Sunday in Easter, we remember how the disciples went north to Galilee as Jesus had told them to do. Now, it was a very long journey, some 80 miles, and it took them 4 days to walk. Now, many of them were fishermen. So they went to the Sea of Galilee to rest. This was a place they knew as boys, for their fathers were fishermen. And this is where they had fished with their fathers. Suddenly, Peter stood up and said, "I'm going fishing." Well, the rest of them went with him to prepare the boat. Soon, they pushed out into the lake, and the sail filled with wind. They fished all night, but they caught nothing. Still, the sounds and smells of the lake comforted them. They were home. In the morning, the sky went pink and then blue, and they could make out the shoreline, and someone was standing there by a fire. I mean, they could see the smoke and the red glow of the charcoal. "Have you caught anything?" All they could say was, "No. Throw your nets off the other side." Well, what could they lose? So they pulled in their empty nets and tossed them out the other side of the boat. Suddenly, they could feel the fish moving as they held the ropes. John wasn't paying attention to the fish. He leaned forward and watched the man on the shore. Then he said to Peter, "It is the Lord." Well, Peter stood up and he jumped and he swam. He felt the sand under his feet and he waded ashore. Well, the others turned the boat toward the land. Well, the nets were so full they could not pull them into the boat, so they just dragged them behind the boat. As they walked towards the fire, the stranger called out, "Bring some fish." When they gathered around the fire, the stranger was no stranger. They all knew it was Jesus, but they were afraid to say anything. "Have some breakfast." Oh, there were fish cooking on the fire, and he gave them fish and bread. They talked and ate. The fish and bread also tasted of home. And then Jesus asked Peter, "Do you love me?" Yes, of course." "Feed my lambs." "Do you love me?" "Yes." "Tend my sheep." "Do you love me?" "You already know that I do." "Feed my sheep." Then he began to talk to Peter about growing old and how you need to help in old age. Sometimes people tell you what to do even if you don't want them to. Years later, They wondered if Jesus had been preparing Peter for his death in Rome as an old man. Then Jesus said, "Follow me." Did he mean all of them? No. So Peter got up and the two of them walked along the shoreline. Peter looked back and saw John following them. "What about this man? Will he die like the rest of us?" "It is not for you to know such things." Peter fell silent, and Jesus was gone. I brought some things that go along with today's story. First thing I brought was a sailing boat. When the disciples got to the Sea of Galilee, they felt at home because they had grown up there fishing, many of them. So they decided to go fishing. The wind filled their sails. Well, they didn't catch many fish that day, and into the night, they fished all night. And in the morning, the stranger on the shore told them to throw their nets out the other side of the boat. And suddenly, their nets were filled with fish. When they were talking with the stranger and eating fish and bread, Jesus asked Peter several times if he loved him, and then he asked him to do something specific. Feed his lambs. I brought a lamb. And tend his sheep. And feed his sheep. So I brought some sheep. I wonder what part of this story you liked best. Maybe it was when the nets were filled with fish. Sure, that made them happy. I wonder what these lambs and sheep that Jesus talked about were. He kept telling Peter to take care of his sheep and feed his sheep and lambs. I wonder who the sheep are. Felt good for the disciples that had grown up as fishermen to get out in the water again and try to fish. They fished all night, and Jesus became known in the morning. He was known in doubt. He was known in the breaking of bread. And he was known in the absence. The disciples were learning about how to know Jesus in a new way.